My mother-in-law wore white to my wedding and demanded the first dance. So I gave her the microphone. Have you ever watched a car crash happen in slow motion, knowing you're the one holding the steering wheel? That's exactly how I felt on the evening of October 14th. The string quartet was playing, the centerpieces were perfectly arranged, and the lighting in the reception hall was just dim enough to hide the absolute panic in my husband's eyes. I was standing near the sweetheart table in my custom ivory gown, a dress I had saved up for over 2 years to buy, and walking toward us across the polished hardwood floor, pushing past my confused bridesmaids, was Brenda, my mother-in-law. She wasn't wearing beige, she wasn't wearing champagne or blush or a tasteful silver. Brenda was wearing a floor-length optic white beaded mermaid-style bridal gown, complete with a tulle train that swept the floor behind her. She marched straight up to my new husband, grabbed him by the wrist, and loudly announced to the stunned room that as the woman who loved him first, she would be taking the first dance. The DJ actually stopped the music. The silence in the room was so heavy, it felt like it was crushing my chest. 200 of our friends and family stared at me, waiting for me to scream, to cry, to run out of the room. Instead, I smiled. I walked over to the DJ booth, picked up the wireless microphone, and walked right up to Brenda. If she wanted the spotlight so badly, I was going to give it to her. I handed her the microphone, and what happened next burned her reputation to the ground forever. But to understand how we got to that disastrous, beautiful moment, I need to take you back to Cleveland, Ohio, about 3 years before the wedding, when I still thought Brenda was just a quirky, overprotective mom. My name is Sarah, I'm 28, and I work as an accounts receivable clerk for a mid-sized logistics company. It's not a glamorous job. I spend my days tracking down unpaid invoices, staring at spreadsheets, and arguing with vendors on the phone. It made me practical, organized, and very good at spotting when the math just doesn't add up. My husband, Mark, is 30. He's an EMT. Mark is one of the good ones, the kind of guy who pulls over to help strangers change tires in the freezing rain. He works grueling 12-hour shifts, sees the absolute worst of human tragedy on a daily basis, and still comes home with a gentle smile. When we met, I thought I had hit the jackpot. He was kind, hardworking, and deeply loyal to his family. That loyalty, however, had a dark, suffocating center, and her name was Brenda. Brenda had been widowed when Mark was only 10 years old. Now I have all the sympathy in the world for a single mother raising a son on her own. But Brenda didn't just raise Mark, she absorbed him. She made him her surrogate husband, her therapist, her handyman, and her entire reason for existing. When Mark and I first started dating, the warning signs were disguised as sweet family traditions. Every Sunday, Mark spent 6 hours at Brenda's house mowing the lawn, fixing her sink, and eating a pot roast. If I came along, Brenda was polite, but in that freezing Midwestern way where you can tell you're being tolerated, not welcomed. Mark has such a sensitive stomach, she would tell me watching me eat. I hope you're not planning on feeding him all that spicy takeout. I usually meal prep his lunches for the week so he gets his nutrients. What was I supposed to do with that? I just smiled and politely told her that Mark seemed to really enjoy my cooking. She stared at me like I had just slapped her. The real shift happened the night Mark proposed. We had been dating for 3 years. He took me to this beautiful, quiet park overlooking Lake Erie, got down on one knee, and asked me to marry him. It was perfect. We were so happy, crying and laughing in the cold wind. When we drove to Brenda's house to tell her the good news, I expected tears of joy. Instead, when Mark held up my left hand, Brenda's face went completely slack. She didn't look at the ring, she looked at Mark's chest, her eyes wide, and she actually took a physical step backward. "Oh," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I see, you're really doing this?" She turned around, walked into her kitchen, and started furiously scrubbing a perfectly clean frying pan. Mark followed her, whispering frantically, trying to comfort her. I stood awkwardly in the living room for 20 minutes, listening to my newly minted fiancé console his mother because he had the audacity to get engaged. When Mark finally came back out, he looked exhausted. "She's just overwhelmed," he told me on the car ride home, squeezing my knee. "She's happy for us, really. It's just hard for her to realize I'm fully grown." I let it go. That was my first mistake. Over the next month, Brenda's supposed grief magically vanished, replaced by an aggressive, manic obsession with our wedding. Suddenly, she was calling me 4 times a day while I was at work. She wasn't asking for details. She was issuing directives. "Sarah, I've decided we are going to use hydrangeas for the centerpieces," she announced on a Tuesday afternoon while I was in the middle of reconciling a massive freight account. Brenda, Mark, and I are paying for the wedding ourselves, I reminded her gently. We haven't finalized the budget for florals yet, but I'm leaning toward greenery and baby's breath to keep costs down. Nonsense, she snapped. This is my son's wedding. I will not have my family thinking we are poor. I'll just handle the florist myself. Brenda, please don't book anything without talking to me, I said, my chest tightening. We have a specific vision. Oh, honey, she laughed, a dry, humorless sound. You'll thank me later. I hung up, feeling completely unsettled. Why was nobody stopping this? I brought it up to Mark that night while he was heating up leftovers in the microwave. Mark, your mom is trying to take over the floral arrangements. She's ignoring everything I say. Mark sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Babe, you know how she gets. She just wants to feel involved. Let her have the flowers. It's one less thing for you to stress about, right? It's not about the flowers, I argued, leaning against the counter. It's about boundaries. She said we are getting married. She's acting like she's the other bride. Mark flinched. Don't say that, Sarah. That's gross. She's just lonely. Just humor her, please, for me. I loved him, so I caved. I told myself it was just wedding stress. I told myself she was just a lonely, overbearing woman who meant well. I was an idiot. The escalation happened fast. 2 months later, we were touring our chosen venue, a beautiful, rustic, converted warehouse space in downtown Cleveland. It fit our budget, it had character, and Mark and I loved it. We were doing the walkthrough with the venue coordinator, a very sharp woman named Chloe, when the double doors banged open. In walked Brenda, wearing a power suit and carrying a clipboard. Sorry I'm late, she announced, echoing off the brick walls. Traffic on I-90 was a nightmare. Mark looked at me, completely panicked. I didn't tell her we were here today, he whispered. I felt a cold prickle of dread on the back of my neck. Then how did she know? Brenda marched up to Chloe, completely ignoring me, and extended her hand. Hi, I'm the groom's mother. I have some serious concerns about the parking situation and the catering menu you sent over. Chloe looked at me, raising an eyebrow. I was mortified. We hadn't sent Brenda the catering menu. The only way she could have seen it was if she had logged into Mark's email account. Actually, Brenda, I stepped in, my voice tight. We've already approved the menu. It's exactly what Mark and I want. Brenda turned slowly to look at me, scanning me from head to toe. Sarah, you may be comfortable serving your family barbecue chicken on paper plates, but Mark's side of the family expects a certain level of class. We will be doing the carved prime rib station. Prime rib is $30 more per plate, Mom. Mark finally spoke up, sounding like a scolded teenager. We can't afford that. Don't worry about the money, Brenda said smoothly, writing something on her clipboard. I'll cover the difference. It's my gift to you. It felt like a trap, but again, Mark squeezed my hand, pleading with his eyes. Just let her do it. We left the venue that day with Brenda having successfully changed our menu, upgraded our linen package, and demanded a different seating arrangement. I was seething, but I kept my mouth shut until we got to the car. Change your email password, I told Mark the second he turned the key in the ignition. Sarah, she was just trying to help. Change it, Mark, right now. She read our private emails. That is a massive violation of privacy. If you don't change it right now, I'm taking this ring off. He stared at me, shocked by my tone. He pulled out his phone and changed the password. It was the first time I had set a hard boundary, and it felt like a tiny victory. But I didn't realize that by cutting off her digital access, I was forcing Brenda to escalate her tactics in the real world. The real nightmare began 3 weeks later when my maid of honor, Jessica, and I went dress shopping. I had specifically chosen a boutique an hour outside of the city to ensure Brenda wouldn't accidentally pop in. I didn't invite her. I wanted this one single thing to be just about me. I was standing on the pedestal in the fitting room wearing a stunning ivory A-line dress with delicate lace sleeves. I looked in the mirror, and for the first time in months, I actually felt like a bride. Jessica was crying. The consultant was smiling. Then, my phone buzzed on the little table next to the mirror. Jessica picked it up, glancing at the screen. Her brow furrowed. Hey, Sarah, you just got an email from a bridal shop downtown. Not this one, a different one. What does it say? I asked, my heart suddenly beating a little faster. Jessica read it out loud. Hi, Sarah. Per Brenda's instructions, we are confirming the order for the second bridal gown. The deposit of $1,500 has been paid. We will see you both for the first fitting on the 12th. The blood completely drained from my face. What second bridal gown? Jessica asked, looking horrified. Who says that to their own sister? Wait, no. Who does this to their future daughter-in-law? I grabbed the phone from Jessica, my hands shaking. I read the email 3 times. It was addressed to me, but sent to a secondary email address I barely used, one that Brenda still had saved in her contacts. I didn't call Brenda. I didn't call Mark. I excused myself, got out of the dress, put my street clothes back on, and drove straight to that downtown boutique. When I walked through the glass doors of Elegance Bridal, I wasn't angry yet. I was mostly just deeply, profoundly confused. I walked up to the front desk, where a woman with perfectly highlighted hair was typing on a tablet. Hi, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. My name is Sarah. I believe my future mother-in-law, Brenda, placed an order here earlier today. I just got an email confirmation. The woman smiled warmly. Oh, yes, Sarah. Brenda was just in here. She's such a character. Let me pull up your file. She tapped her screen a few times. Yes, the deposit is paid for the Casablanca gown. It's a gorgeous choice for a vow renewal or a second look. Can I see it? I asked. Of course. We have the sample in the back. She walked away and returned a moment later carrying a heavy, opaque garment bag. She unzipped it, pulling back the plastic to reveal the dress. My breath caught in my throat. It was a wedding dress, not a bridesmaid dress, not a mother-of-the-groom dress. It was a pure, blinding white, heavily beaded, mermaid-style bridal gown with a sweetheart neckline and a dramatic tulle train. It was actually significantly more extravagant than the dress I had just purchased for myself. Brenda said you wanted something a little more glamorous for the reception, the consultant chirped, oblivious to the fact that my world was currently tilting on its axis. Can I see the order sheet? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She handed me the iPad. I scrolled past the gown details down to the sizing. Bust, 38, waist, 32, hips, 40. Those weren't my measurements. I'm a size 6. Those were Brenda's measurements. I stared at the screen until the numbers blurred. How much of this had been planned? She hadn't ordered a second dress for me. She had used my name and my email address to order a wedding dress for herself, so that if the shop called, it would look like the bride had approved the purchase. She was weaponizing my own identity against me. Is everything okay? The consultant asked, her smile faltering. Could you print a copy of this order for my records? I asked calmly. Just the itemized receipt with the measurements. She printed it out. I folded the piece of paper, put it in my purse, and walked to my car. I sat in the driver's seat for 20 minutes, staring at the steering wheel, waiting for the tears to come. But they didn't. Instead, a cold, hard knot of absolute clarity settled in my stomach. I drove home and waited for Mark's shift to end. When he walked through the door at 7 p.m., smelling like hospital sanitizer and stale coffee, I didn't yell. I sat him down at the kitchen table and slid the folded piece of paper across the wood. What's this? He asked, rubbing his tired eyes. It's a receipt, I said. Your mother bought a wedding dress today, a white beaded floor-length bridal gown. She used my name to order it, but the measurements are hers. Mark stared at the paper. I watched his brain try to process the information, watched him desperately search for a way to make this normal. Sarah, this has to be a mistake, he stammered. Maybe she's ordering it for a friend, or maybe she wrote down the wrong numbers. She wouldn't buy a wedding dress for our wedding. Mark, she used my email address to hide it. She bought a wedding dress. Okay, even if she did, Mark said, his voice rising in that defensive, panicky way it always did when Brenda was criticized. Maybe she just didn't realize it was a bridal gown. You know she doesn't know fashion. I'll talk to her. I'll tell her she can't wear white. No, I said firmly. You aren't just going to tell her she can't wear white. You are going to tell her that if she shows up to our wedding in that dress, she will be turned away at the door. And if you don't tell her that, I will. Mark ran his hands through his hair, looking at me like I was the one being unreasonable. Sarah, you're stressing out over a piece of paper. You're blowing this out of proportion. I will handle my mother. Just stop looking for reasons to hate her. That hurt. It felt like a physical punch to the chest. He was actively choosing to protect his mother's feelings over my reality. I realized right then that Mark was never going to stand up to her. The umbilical cord had been replaced by a steel cable, and I was just the girl trying to cut it with safety scissors. Was I the last person to know how deep this went? For the next 2 months leading up to the wedding, Brenda played the perfect, innocent mother-in-law. When Mark supposedly talked to her about the dress, she feigned complete ignorance, claiming it was just a champagne evening gown and accusing me of being a bridezilla. Mark, desperate for peace, believed her. I didn't argue anymore. I went completely silent on the issue. I nodded, I smiled, I attended the rehearsal dinner, and I let everyone think I had lost my mind over a simple misunderstanding. But in the background, I was making my own preparations. I spoke to my bridesmaids, I spoke to the venue coordinator, and most importantly, I had a very long, very detailed conversation with our DJ, a guy named Marcus, who had seen every flavor of wedding drama known to man, and was more than happy to help me execute a contingency plan. Which brings us back to October 14th, the wedding day. The ceremony itself went off without a hitch. Brenda showed up to the church wearing a perfectly acceptable, conservative navy blue pantsuit. Mark shot me a smug, relieved look as if to say, "See, you were worried for nothing." I smiled back at him, but I noticed that Brenda had brought an unusually large garment bag into the bridal suite before the ceremony, claiming it was her dancing clothes because the pantsuit was too stiff. After we said our vows and took our photos, Mark and I were held in the bridal suite while our guests transitioned to the reception hall for cocktail hour. When it was time for our grand entrance, Chloe, the venue coordinator, came to get us. She looked directly at me and gave me a microscopic nod. The trap had been sprung. Mark and I walked into the reception hall to thunderous applause. We took our seats at the sweetheart table. The room was gorgeous, lit by hundreds of candles, exactly the way I had envisioned it. And then the doors at the back of the hall swung open. There she was. Brenda hadn't just changed into the Casablanca gown, she had fully accessorized. She was wearing rhinestone chandelier earrings, long white satin gloves, and, I am not joking, a small, decorative silver tiara nestled into her freshly hairsprayed updo. The murmurs started instantly. It was like a wave of physical discomfort washing over the room. People stopped chewing. Forks clinked awkwardly against plates. Mark froze beside me, all the color drained from his face. "Oh my God," he whispered, staring at his mother as she glided across the floor toward us. She actually did it." She walked right up to our table, ignoring the horrified stares of my family and the deeply uncomfortable shifting of hers. She didn't look at me. She looked only at Mark. "Mark, darling," she said, her voice carrying over the low hum of the background music. "Since your father isn't here, I think it's only right that the woman who loved you first gets the very first dance of the evening." She grabbed his wrist. Mark looked at me, completely paralyzed like a deer in headlights. He couldn't speak. He couldn't move. He had spent his entire life being conditioned to submit to her, and even now, on his wedding day, with his bride sitting right next to him, he didn't have the spine to tell her no. I didn't wait for him to figure it out. I stood up, smoothing the skirt of my own dress. I smiled warmly at Brenda. "You know what, Brenda?" I said, my voice clear and calm. "You are absolutely right. You did love him first." I stepped around the table. The entire room was holding its collective breath. I walked straight to the DJ booth where Marcus was already waiting, holding the wireless microphone. I took it from him, tapped it twice to make sure it was on, and walked back to where Brenda was standing, practically glowing with her assumed victory. I handed her the microphone. Brenda looked down at the microphone in her white, satin-gloved hand. For a split second, she looked confused. She had expected me to scream. She had expected me to throw a fit, run to the bathroom in tears, and look like the crazy, jealous bride while she comforted her son. My utter calm threw her off script, but her ego was too massive to pass up an audience. She gripped the microphone, looked out at the dead silent room, and plastered on a sickly, sweet, trembling smile. "Thank you, Sarah," she said, her voice echoing through the venue speakers. She turned to Mark, who was still frozen in his chair, looking like he might actually vomit. "You know they say a boy's best friend is his mother. When Mark's father passed away, it was just the two of us against the world. I am his rock, I am his foundation. And tonight, I just wanted to remind him that no matter who comes into his life, a mother's bond with her son is the only permanent thing in this world." The collective cringe in the room was almost audible. My maid of honor, Jessica, looked like she was ready to vault over a table and tackle Brenda to the floor. I didn't lose my smile. I just turned back to the DJ booth. Marcus, God bless him, gave me a sharp nod, pulled out a second wireless microphone, and handed it to me. Then he reached over and hit a switch on his soundboard. The lights in the venue dimmed. A motorized hum filled the room, and the massive 10 by 10-foot projector screen that we were supposed to use for our childhood photo montage rolled down from the ceiling directly behind Brenda. I tapped my microphone. "That was beautiful, Brenda," I said, my voice echoing right back at hers. "And since you wanted the spotlight tonight to celebrate your incredibly permanent bond with Mark, I wanted to make sure we truly appreciated the lengths you went to for this evening." Marcus hit his laptop spacebar. The projector flared to life. Projected 10 feet high behind Brenda's head was the itemized receipt from Elegance Bridal. Next to it was the email confirmation, clearly showing my name, but displaying Brenda's exact measurements: 38 bust, 32 waist, 40 hips. The room erupted in gasps. The confusion melted into instant, horrified understanding. Brenda whipped around to look at the screen. Her jaw actually dropped. She fumbled with her microphone but couldn't seem to find the button to turn it off. "For those of you admiring my mother-in-law's gown," I announced to the room, my voice completely steady, "it's a Casablanca custom bridal piece. Retail price, roughly $2,000. Brenda ordered it 3 months ago, using my email address to hide the paper trail, hoping the bridal shop would think the bride herself had approved a second dress." "Sarah, stop!" Brenda shrilled into her microphone, the feedback whining sharply through the speakers. "This is a private family matter. Turn that screen off." "We aren't finished," I said, my tone dropping its polite facade, becoming cold and sharp. This was the moment. The final piece of the puzzle that I had figured out just 24 hours prior. The piece that finally proved what kind of person Brenda truly was. "I told you all earlier that I'm an accounts receivable clerk," I continued, pacing slowly toward our table. "I spend 40 hours a week tracking missing money and looking for numbers that don't match up. Yesterday, when I was reviewing our final venue invoices, I noticed something strange about the prime rib upgrade Brenda so generously offered to pay for." I turned to my husband. He was staring at me, his eyes wide and panicked. "Mark," I said softly, but the microphone carried it to everyone. "Take out your phone, pull up your American Express statement from July 12th. "Sarah, what are you doing?" he whispered, his voice cracking. "Pull it up, Mark." With trembling hands, he pulled his phone from his tuxedo jacket. He opened his banking app, the blue light reflecting on his pale face. He scrolled down. "Read the charge on July 12th, I instructed him. He stared at the screen. He blinked hard, as if the words were written in a foreign language. "Elegance Bridal," he choked out. $1,500. "Exactly," I said. I turned back to the crowd, pointing at the massive receipt still glowing on the wall. Brenda told Mark she needed his emergency credit card to place the deposit for the catering upgrade, but our venue coordinator, Chloe, confirmed to me yesterday that the prime rib was never booked. Brenda canceled it behind our backs, leaving us with the standard chicken dinner, and she used her own son's emergency EMT fund to buy a bridal gown to wear to his wedding. The silence that followed was absolute. It wasn't just the dress anymore. It wasn't just a quirky, overbearing mother with poor boundaries. It was financial abuse. It was calculated theft. It was a sick, twisted manipulation designed to humiliate me, funded by the son she claimed to love so much. Brenda dropped her microphone. It hit the hardwood floor with a deafening crack that made half the room jump. She lunged toward Mark's chair, reaching for his arm, her white tool train dragging heavily behind her. "Mark, sweetie, listen to me," she cried, her voice stripped of its confident, theatrical tone. Now she just sounded desperate. "She's manipulating the numbers. I was going to pay you back. I just wanted to look beautiful for your big day. She's trying to turn you against me." Mark didn't look at me. He didn't look at the crowd. He looked at his mother's hand on his tuxedo sleeve. For 3 years, I had watched this man fold himself into origami to appease this woman. I had watched him defend her snooping, excuse her insults, and beg me to just humor her. I stood there holding my breath, terrified that even now, even in front of 200 people, he would find a way to protect her. Mark slowly stood up. He looked down at Brenda's hand, and then, very deliberately, he brushed it off his arm like it was a spider. "You stole from me," he said. He didn't yell. His voice was completely hollow. "I work 80 hours a week in an ambulance. I save every penny, and you stole from me so you could come here and play a game with my wife. Mark, get out," he said. Brenda stumbled backward, clutching the bodice of her wedding gown. She looked frantically around the room, making eye contact with her older brother, Mark's uncle. "David, please, tell him he's being irrational." David, a gruff retired mechanic from Akron, just shook his head, looking disgusted. You look like a damn fool, Brenda. Get your coat and leave. No one was coming to save her. No one was going to excuse it. Stripped of the shadows where she usually did her manipulating, exposed under the glaring light of a projector screen, there was nowhere left to hide. Brenda let out a ragged, humiliated sob, turned around, and practically ran toward the exit. The heavy wooden doors slammed shut behind her, the sound echoing through the stunned reception hall. Marcus quietly turned off the projector. Mark stood perfectly still for a long moment. Then he turned to me. He looked shattered. The illusion of his perfect mother had just violently collapsed, and he was standing in the rubble. He didn't get angry at me. He just walked around the table, pulled me into his arms, and buried his face in my neck. He was crying. "I'm so sorry," he whispered against my skin. "I'm so sorry I didn't see it." I hugged him back, holding him tight. "I know," I whispered. "It's okay. We're okay now." I motioned to Marcus. He queued up a gentle, acoustic version of Stand By Me. I pulled Mark to the center of the dance floor. We didn't do the choreographed routine we had practiced. We just held each other, swaying slowly in the dim light, while our friends and family watched in a heavy, respectful silence. It wasn't the joyful first dance I had dreamed of, but it was real. It was honest. And it was just ours. The emotional recovery from that night has been a long, painful road. The reception eventually picked back up, but the energy was permanently shifted. We drank, we ate the chicken dinners, and we went home utterly exhausted. The next morning, Mark woke up, called his bank, reported the $1,500 charge as fraud, and canceled the card. Then he blocked Brenda's phone number. We are coming up on our 1-year anniversary now. Mark has been in intensive therapy for 9 months, unpacking a lifetime of emotional enmeshment and covert abuse. It hasn't been easy. There were weeks when he was deeply depressed, grieving the mother he thought he had, but he's stronger now. He set ironclad boundaries, and he finally sees our marriage as his primary family. As for Brenda, she tried to send a few flying monkeys our way, cousins and aunts who tried to guilt Mark into speaking to her. But because of how publicly everything went down, she couldn't spin the narrative. 200 people saw the receipt. 200 people saw the bank statement. The entire family knows she's a thief who wore a wedding gown to her son's wedding. She is a pariah in her own social circle. Sometimes I look back on that night and wonder if I went too far. I wonder if I should have confronted her privately in the bridal suite before she ever walked into the room. But I know Mark. If I had done it privately, she would have cried, played the victim, twisted the truth, and he would have forgiven her. He needed the shock to his system. He needed to see her standing there, completely undeniable in her white gown, exposed to the world, to finally break the spell. Sometimes you have to burn the house down to see what the foundation is really made of. So, Reddit, I have to ask you, was I too harsh for exposing her in front of 200 people? Or did she bring the humiliation on herself the exact second she decided to wear a wedding dress down my aisle?